Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Alexander Skarsgard and Michael Pena are two cops declaring war on everyone in the latest from writer-director John Michael McDonough. Bob, played by Michael Pena, and Terry, played by Alexander Skarsgard, are two corrupt cops who are back on the job on their last chance after a sabbatical where they appear to have learnt nothing. As they solve the case for a robbery using their very unorthodox methods, including intimidation, framing and planting evidence, they find themselves on a collision course with a powerful British mastermind named James Mangan, played by Theo James, who will not go down easy. War on Everyone is the third film from writer-director John Michael McDonough, who, like his brother Martin, who made in Bruges, specialises in dark comedies, and he had major success with his first two films, both critically and commercially, The Guard and Calvary, both of which starred Brendan Gleeson. In fact, The Guard actually stands as the most successful Irish independent film of all time, and that was his debut. And this is very much more of a throwback to The Guard. If you never saw The Guard, it had Brendan Gleeson as an Irish Garda cop who's mismatched with Don Cheadle's FBI man. It was a buddy cop movie. And again, this is a similar buddy cop movie, but it seems like it's more intended for a bit more of a wider commercial audience. And War on Everyone is a very odd film, but that kind of makes sense considering that it's made by a British-Irish director, made with UK and Irish money, filmed in America, set in Albuquerque, with an international cast. And understandably, the results are a little bit of a mess. I think what I liked most about War on Everyone is the pairing between Alexander Skarsgard and Michael Pena, which on paper really shouldn't work, because it's such an unusual pairing of actors, but that unorthodox chemistry between them actually works surprisingly well. They've got a good repartee between them, they know how to fire off the dialogue between each other, and you really want that dynamic in a buddy cop movie. And I think a lot of the reason that this movie works as well as it does comes down to them, especially when it comes to Pena, who I think is a really terrific comic talent. If you've seen him in many of his character roles, especially in things like Ant-Man, you know that he has such strong timing, and it's really brought to the fore here. And these two characters, Pena's Bob is definitely the brains of the outfit. He's certainly, of the pair, the better cop. He's the more straight-laced one. He's always the one that's sort of got the plan of what they're doing. He's a family man, essentially. He's caring for his kids, both of whom are overweight. He is just trying to essentially enjoy himself to some extent. It seems like he's there to rein in Terry when he's going a little bit far, but generally he's the more responsible one. My only pity with Pena is that in this movie he doesn't really get much to do. His character doesn't really undergo that much of a development. It just sort of stays the same constantly throughout the movie. By comparison, Skarsgard, his character Terry, he actually gets a real arc through the movie, and it appears when we start the film that Terry is in full-on Martin Riggs from Lethal Weapon mode. He is in complete self-destruction. He is the sort of guy that wakes up in the morning and he's you know, just drinking constantly. So he'll be tipsy first thing in the morning, but by the evening he'll be completely hammered. And across the film, Terry begins to get out of that a little bit, because he starts to get this sort of makeshift family that starts with this relationship with Tessa Thompson from Creed, who is largely wasted here as eye candy. And that does make you warm to that character a little bit more, and it just gives a little bit more texture to Terry than Bob, who just stays the same throughout the entire movie. Their methods are so corrupt and reprehensible, so they'll go into a place and they need an informant, they'll assault a couple of people, and then they'll frame the guy they want on a drugs charge, and threaten and intimidate him, and then once he accepts, they'll all start having a laugh together and start snorting the cocaine that they've brought to frame him. I can understand making characters, you know, reprehensible and unlikable. This is clearly trying to go for a bad Santa approach for cop movies, but you've got to give me something to be invested in, and honestly, if it wasn't for the actors playing them, I wouldn't have given a crap about either of these two characters, because after a while they're just unpleasant to be around. And what's worse is that you never really understand what these guys' deal is. Like, why are they behaving like this? Are they just so disenfranchised with it all? Is Bob just trying to help out his friend? What is going on between them? And the movie never really fleshes out why. There's never really an explanation given. It's just sort of there. And it doesn't make you warm to them. And I know the joke is meant to be that they're bad people. These are bad people, but they're going up against a guy that's somehow even worse than they are. It's just that it isn't all that funny. I spent most of War and Everyone trying to work out what exactly it was trying to be, because yeah, it's a buddy cop movie, and it's got these inflections of something from the 70s and 80s, and there's stuff like Paul Reiser being cast as their boss, but I didn't know where the plot was supposed to be going. Is it supposed to be a heist movie? Because at one point in the plot, it looks like Bob and Terry are investigating it, but the only reason they're doing so is because they're plotting to try and steal the 1 million in money that's been stolen for themselves, but then that kind of fizzles out as the film progresses. Is it meant to be a satire or a commentary on police brutality and corruption? Because there's elements of that in there, like the fact that the reason they were on sabbatical is that Bob took offence at a fellow officer for a racist remark. And then it sort of jokes around that, yeah, all police are prejudiced and corrupt and racist, but, you know, that's just the way it is. But again, it doesn't feel like the movie has enough teeth in that matter. It sort of brings it up and then never really interacts with it again. It feels like a lot of elements that just didn't come together, and I think McDonough was aware of that when he was assembling the movie, because the editing is all over the place. I mean, really, really jarring. Scenes will start and stop at very unusual points. You'll be thrown from one scene after another, which actually made it very hard to work out what was supposed to be happening, because the scenes feel so disconnected from one another. It feels like the main structure of the movie has been reshuffled. The main villain, played by Theo James, it seems like his character was supposed to be introduced later in the movie, but his scenes have been pushed forward and they don't fit with what is supposed to be happening in the actual timeline of the movie. It just feels like it's really scattershot. And there are things that I quite liked in this movie. There are moments that I found quite funny. But then they'll be followed by something that falls completely flat on its face. It's such a wildly mixed bag of just individual scenes. Even the movie's title, War and Everyone, doesn't really make much sense in regards to the plot, unless you interpret it as a mission statement, because this is a film that has a joke that's intended to offend almost everyone of any kind of persuasion, be it black, Hispanic, women, gay, or even bald people. There's a joke in here that's aimed specifically at you to ruffle your feathers. And there were jokes in this movie that I did laugh at that were a bit close to the bone. But for the most part, the offence is largely mitigated by the fact that you don't sense the movie actually believes in any of those things, because the characters don't. The characters are deliberately trying to provoke people, they're deliberately trying to get under their skin. So it actually feels very disingenuous in that way, like it's trying very hard to shock people. And the difference between the characters in something like The Guard, for example, and the characters in this movie is that you had Brendan Gleeson in The Guard, and he knows how to bring a humanity to this kind of role, whereas for all the efforts of the actors here, Bob and Terry remain caricatures. And yes, I understand that there is a place for edgy, non-PC humour. I'm not sure if it's particularly well timed right now, given the tense political landscape, but even with that said, these characters just don't believe in anything, even themselves. They'll be in danger or jeopardy, and they don't give a damn. So why should we? If they don't care about what's happening in their own movie, then you faithfully removed all the tension and jeopardy that should be coming from the power of the villains in this plot. You understand the sort of structure of the movie in that they don't care about anything until a certain point they do, which forces them into action. And the movie does that in its third act, with this revelation that there's this grinding shift in tone. But before that, there's nothing to really be involved in. It just sort of ambles along. It's the sort of movie that goes on a random jaunt over to Iceland at one point, Why? Because it can, that's why. The director's philosophical elements, that has been the signature staple of all his movies, it doesn't make sense here. Those sort of underpinnings, that sort of religious morality that makes sense in an Irish context to something like Calvary and the Guard, that doesn't make sense in the middle of America. It doesn't make sense in the middle of Albuquerque. And it comes across as not only ill-placed, it comes off as being a little bit pretentious. It makes the movie at times come across like one of those post-Tarantino impersonators from the 90s. But I think the movie's real miscalculation is the casting of Theo James as James Mangan, this English criminal mastermind who has his fingers in every pie. And he's meant to be this all-powerful but reprehensible figure in the plot. And you can understand why James took this role, because he's clearly trying to shake off his pretty boy image that he established in things like the Divergent film series, for example. But he doesn't have nearly enough presence on screen to justify his casting here. This is a character, as soon as you see him on screen, you're meant to despise him. He is meant to be just the worst thing in this movie, and yet James's performance is so bland and flat that, yeah, he comes across as a posh villain, but he doesn't give you that sense of evil that really should come with that. It's a real far cry from someone like Mark Strong in The Guard, for example. But honestly, he has the movie stolen out from under him by Caleb Landry Jones as his right-hand man, who gives this such over-the-top, very weird performance that, you know, he's kind of a bit creepy. And it's so memorable that he's actually more of a defining villain than James is. This really kind of wormy character. It honestly could have done with someone much more charismatic like that. I don't know what Landry Jones is doing in this movie because it's so bizarre, but at least it's something far more memorable than what is supposed to be the main villain of the movie. And the movie is especially shown up by the comparison to The Nice Guys, the detective comedy from earlier this year with Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling, which is a much better directed, much more tightly structured, much funnier movie than this one. By comparison, this movie looks like an ill-disciplined mess. It's a real letdown for a writer-director who has previously shown himself to be extremely talented, and I'm certain that this is just a misstep. This just was something that just didn't work, and I'm pretty sure he'll get back on his feet in the future. But if you wanted to watch a movie that was like this, just stay at home and watch The Nice Guys. It's pretty much the same movie, only much better. War on Everyone is a weaker effort from McDonough that doesn't know what it wants to be. Although Skarsgard and Pena make for a solid comic pairing, they're playing characters that are not easy to like or particularly well defined. In general, it feels like the film relies far too much on glib cynicism without too much of a point or purpose behind it, with the director's signature philosophical elements being especially ill-placed in this outing. Even at its best, the film is erratic and varies in quality and tone from scene to scene. There's definitely some amusing moments to be had, not aided by jarring editing and a miscast Theo James as the villain. Instead of aiming at everyone, it should have focused on actual target, and the result might not have been such a misfire. Coming up soon, Ken Loach gives his thoughts on austerity in I, Daniel Blake, and we have an Amy Adams double bill with Arrival and Nocturnal Animals. But until then, I'm Matthew Burke, fading out.